the What Really Happened radio show, putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Monday, October 14th, 2013, the start of a brand new week of utter insanity being shoveled at us by the Congress critters and the president inside that Sodom on the Potomac there. We've got a couple of program notes here real quick. Tomorrow, Jim Traficant is going to be on our show to talk about current events, the bankruptcy of the United States of America. And on Thursday, we are tentatively scheduled to have John McAfee coming on to talk about his new plans to prevent the NSA from peering into our private law-abiding communications, and also his commentary about this computer system that they have for Obamacare. And, of course, Claire will be joining us here on Friday. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny is in our control room twiddling the dials and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, obviously, today is Columbus Day. Huzzah, 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 Columbus Day. And the banks and post office are closed. The stock market is open. The rest of the government is still shut down, but that's got nothing to do with Columbus Day. And Columbus Day, perhaps not unexpectedly, looking back from an age in which we know how much we are all lied to by the ruling parties, Columbus Day really isn't what you're told it is. For one thing, Columbus knew the world was round, and he knew there were lands on the other side of the Atlantic. Now, he sold his expedition to Spain by promising fast trade routes to the Far East, but the reality is we know the Vikings found the North American continent. Were the first Europeans there. Leif Erikson found the New World 500 years before Columbus. We know because of traces of cocaine found in the Egyptian pharaohs' mummies that Egypt was carrying out cross-Atlantic trade with Central and South America. Now, both the Vikings and the Egyptians traded with the Muslims, not just goods, but knowledge. And so the Muslims knew there were lands on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, and they gave that information to the Knights Templar, who were actually very cozy with the Muslims in the Holy Land, despite the official story of we're there to whack them over the head to protect the pilgrims on the Pilgrim Road. And if you will remember, when Philip the Fair sent out his edict to crush down the Knights Templars, there were two countries where that did not occur. Scotland was one of them, and the other one was Portugal. And the Knights Templar in Portugal renamed themselves the Knights of Christ, and they focused on maritime activity, shipping. And they had charts showing that there were lands on the other side of the Atlantic. Now, Columbus' wife came from one of those Templar families. And by the way, did you ever notice the traditional representation of Columbus ships has the cross of the Knights Templar on the sails? There's your dead giveaway. So Columbus sailed on over there, and Spain declared that he had found the New World because that gave Spain the right to claim it all as their own, even though by rights it should have gone to the Vikings here. And so Columbus showed up in the New World, set foot on the land, and planted a cross, and he recited this prayer called the Requirimento, which officially made the new lands Catholic. Now, since the locals didn't object because they didn't speak Latin, the New World was declared officially the domain of the Catholic Church, and inside that prayer, the Requirimento, is a little clause saying, since you have all agreed you are now under Catholic rule, any bad things that happen to you are your own fault, and we are not to blame for the subsequent burnings and chopping off and the rest of it. So that's Columbus Day. And, of course, over time, it's been fluffed up as right and true and just. But like so much else of history, it is, in fact, a pack of lies here. Now, getting on to more current events, over the weekend it was kind of amazing watching the corporate media dealing, first of all, with the Truckers' Ride for the Constitution and then the Million Veteran March. And, of course, all last week we were seeing just all this ridicule and abuse and accusations and smearing going on. I was getting emails from people saying that they were trying to post photos of the Truckers' Ride to Facebook, and they were vanishing as soon as they were posted. Virtually no coverage at all in the corporate media, in the independent media, a lot of back and forth. We're not really sure how successful it was. Larry Klayman gave an interview in which he reported that truckers were being met by the police outside Washington, D.C. and told that if they proceeded any further, they would be receiving very long jail sentences, which means they'd be in jail for many, many months, during which they couldn't drive their trucks, pay for the truck, take care of their families, and apparently a lot of truckers were turned back by that threat. Now, yesterday morning, as the Veterans March got going, Fox News was actually reporting on all these World War II veterans in Washington, D.C. to commemorate the memory of their fallen comrades, which is not why they were there. And, of course, we now know that the veterans basically tore down those barricades around the memorials, marched over to the White House and piled them up in front of the White House. The D.C. police were there trying to stare them down. It was a very small force of the police, a very large number of veterans. There were a few altercations. One 90-year-old veteran apparently got abused by the police, but the police looked at that angry mob of combat-trained veterans staring them down, and they basically backed off. But the veterans were standing in front of the White House saying, "Shut down the White House, shut down the White House." And today, of course, Fox News is having to basically acknowledge that this wasn't a commemoration of the heroism of World War II. This was a protest against the government treatment of veterans, including the cancellation of death benefits for the families of those people who died in Iraq and Afghanistan. And they had to sort of revise their story. But it was kind of interesting to contrast the Fox News coverage yesterday morning versus what they're saying about it today. Complete 180 about the purpose here. By the way, I did misspeak. Apparently we have a new board operator in our control room today. It's Craig. And he's brand new at RBN, and Manny is training him. So when you call in on the phone with your comments, it's going to be Craig you're talking to rather than Manny. Craig, I apologize. I didn't get the memo. What can I tell you here? So let's see. U.S. News and World Report was out there trying to smear the D.C. trucker protest with outright fabrications. I mean, we've reached a point where the corporate media is just having to push so many absurd lies, it's really calling attention to itself. And, of course, that only accelerates the loss of trust by the American people in the corporate media and the U.S. government itself. Allegations that some members of the National Guard, even though they were not officially deployed, were bussed in to try and create a deterrent for people going into the downtown part of Washington, D.C. So they were trying to get this thing shut down any way they could, because the one thing the U.S. federal government is most afraid of right now is every American standing up at the same time and say, enough is enough. We don't support this. We don't support the wars. We're not going to be the wallets of last resort for Wall Street's crimes and corruption. So the message is getting out anyway. Foreign investment in the United States is down like a third over last year. And that was figures that we got from something like 4 to 5 months ago. It could even be worse now, with all this talk about everybody switching over to the yuan, everybody dropping the dollar. The process has already begun for the loss of Bretton Woods, because countries are abandoning the dollar faster than the U.S. can conquer them. As of this morning, all of the barricades around the World War II memorial, around all the other memorials, they're back. They were taken back. The government is actually spending more money to try and keep these memorials closed than they would have spent just leaving them open, and there wouldn't have been this huge political backlash against it. I think we're seeing the White House is just coming from a position of ego. If I say these are closed, they are closed no matter how much it's going to cost us. Apparently, in a demonstration of what I would call imperial hubris, the U.S. government declared the Florida Bay closed due to the shutdown, meaning people who have their businesses, charter boats, fishing boats, whatever, in the Florida Bay were told they could not leave the dock and sail out into the ocean because the government had shut down. Apparently, the government feels it owns the oceans along with everything else, and no, it does not. Now, it's kind of interesting. Over the weekend, we're seeing more and more states step in and say, we will take over funding and management of all these national parks. I think it's a good trend, because if the states step in and start operating the country, it only underscores how superfluous the central federal government really is. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, over the weekend, the EBT system, the electronic benefit transfer system, meaning the food stamp system, broke down. People were going into supermarkets to get food for their family, and the little swipe cards would not work. And it was completely unexpected. The system locked up, was unavailable. It was restored yesterday, but it really upset a lot of people because there was no advance warning. Now, Xerox, which has the contract to maintain the actual computer system on behalf of, I think it's J.P. Morgan, actually manages the food stamp program, and they make a huge amount of money out of it. They're saying it was a glitch caused by a vendor system upgrade. And, you know, when I was working in film production, you know, we had an ironclad rule. You don't take the existing system down until you know the new improved system is absolutely up and running perfectly, but apparently that's wisdom that has not managed to percolate from Hollywood to Washington, D.C. And again, it was completely unexpected. A lot of people were really panicked when the system came back up. A lot of people were just going in, maxing out the cards and hoarding the food and taking it home. A lot of people unable to feed their family on Saturday night. And it is a reminder, when you allow yourself to become dependent on a central government and that government can't do its job, you are screwed. This government builds its power base by taking away all your money and then giving it back to you so that you will be thankful for their generosity. And then, of course, when the system breaks down, people get very, very angry. And I think for all those people who are on food stamps, and it's, you know, what, 47, 50 million people now? It's a reminder they cannot rely on this government. And I'm sure a lot of them are thinking of the wisdom, let us keep our money and manage our own lives, our own businesses, our own finances, and our own food. And that way, if there's a failure someplace, it's just a few people. But when we have this centralized control over something as critical as food and it stops working, a lot of people are hurting. That's the argument against centralization. Don't run everything through one system that when it breaks, everything shuts down. I remember many years ago in Hollywood, there was a computer animation company called Digital Productions, and you probably remember them from the movie The Last Starfighter, which was the first feature film with significant scenes created entirely within the computer. And it's a fun movie, too. But the company made what I considered a very severe strategic mistake, which is probably why they returned my resume. They bought a Cray supercomputer, a single Cray supercomputer, and everything in the shop went through it. And every time that one big supercomputer failed, everybody got to go home. And eventually, Digital Productions went out of business. They were having to rewrite a lot of available code because the supercomputer it was based on Fortran, whereas the vast majority of computer animation runs under Unix or Linux and the C programming language. And it was a severe strategic mistake. Today, of course, computer animation companies have learned from their mistake, and they have what are called render farms, which are thousands and thousands of very inexpensive boxes chewing away on the computer animation. So if there's a computer failure, it's just one little box and things keep going. And unfortunately, our government doesn't think that way. Their entire ability to exert power and authority over you is to grab all the control into their central little system, and then when that central system fails, oh, it was just a glitch. We're sorry you all went hungry, but, you know, it's a known issue. We promised to fix it. And along, of course, with all the problems out of the Obamacare computer system, it calls into question the due diligence the government exercises in setting up these computer systems. My personal gripe is the copyright registration system over at the Library of Congress, which I am forced to use on a regular basis because of Claire's music writing. It is the most unintuitive, useless user interface I've ever seen. You're having to continually re-enter the same data over and over and over again. Name, address, where does this go, who's the representative, no carry forward. It's a lame system. I figure some Congress critter's kid got the contract on that one. But the EBT went down for a good part of the weekend, and they're saying, oh, it's a glitch, nothing to think about. But it did upset a lot of families, because when you're dependent on the government and the government proves itself to be unreliable, that is very, very traumatic. Now, getting back to the shutdown, which is still going on, Obama's having a meeting at the White House with the GOP and Democratic leadership all together to try and hammer this deal out. But the word we're getting from inside the Senate is there's probably not going to be a deal by October 17th, this coming Thursday, which is the deadline. where the Treasury says it's going to run out of money. Now, that is also a little bit of propaganda scare tactic, because the U.S. government actually exceeded its debt limit several months ago, and they've kept things going through what are called extraordinary measures. They stopped funding the federal workers' pension as one. They're taking money that was allocated for other programs. They've already shut those down, and they're just scrambling the money around. This is a government that obviously cannot balance its books. And the real heartache here is looking back at 2008, actually looking back at the whole administration of George W. Bush, when tax incentives were passed that encouraged American corporations to transfer their manufacturing to other countries. So at the same time the government is going hopelessly broke, they're giving tax credits to companies to take the high-paying manufacturing jobs and send them to other countries. So we have a government which, in its schizophrenia and its lack of the overview, is saying you have to work for less money, and by the way, your taxes and debts are going up. You don't need to be an Einstein to realize that is a policy leading to a problem. But our problem with Washington, D.C. is everybody in there is only looking out for their own agenda, for their own supporters, for their own backers, for their favored lobbyists, and nobody's maintaining an overview of what is best for the nation as a whole. And that's why you see so many obviously contradictory policies that have brought us to the edge of collapse here. Now, Republican Congressman Louis Gohmert of Texas, who's the highest-ranking member of the House Committee of, well, I don't know what committee he's on there, but basically he's saying if the government defaults, that Obama should be impeached. It's an impeachable offense. Now, I'm not sure if that really qualifies as a high crime and misdemeanor as opposed to high stupidity and recklessness and disregard for fiscal responsibility, but I think we should impeach the entire government if it defaults. And this is not a new idea, because back in the 1990s, there was a movement across the United States called the Ultimatum Resolution that stated that if the U.S. government debt crossed above $6 trillion, oh, those happy days of fiscal restraint, the federal government would be dissolved, and it was being promoted as a state's resolution. Unfortunately, not enough states signed on to the measure, and it didn't go anywhere. But even back in the 1990s, they were openly talking about if this federal government cannot get its financial house in order, it is time for this government to go. And we know why this government is hopelessly broke. They're showering trillions all over Israel. They're showering trillions all over Wall Street to prop up that Ponzi scheme. They're showering trillions all over the war machine to invade all these other countries to force them back to Bretton Woods. At the same time, U.S. economic policies are undermining the trustworthiness and credibility of the dollar itself. Now, getting into Obamacare, there is a huge security flaw that just surfaced in the system. If you have succeeded in signing up, and you go back in and request a change of your email, the notification of the email change is sent to your new email rather than the old one. That means that if somebody gets your password and hacks into your account and changes the email, you will never find out about it. And that means somebody can get in and start playing around with your numbers, causing all kinds of mischief, and you will not find out about it until the whole system collapses around you. And it just shows this system was nowhere near ready to be deployed. And Obama's pushing it forward because he's looking at that expected $200 billion in additional tax revenues to dangle in front of lenders once the debt ceiling is raised. I'm going to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about Obamacare, and of course, at this point, despite all the spin and bias and propaganda, and it's just a glitch and it's no big deal, pretty much the entire country has come to understand that the computer system lying at the heart of Obamacare is badly, badly flawed. No surprise, the programmers who wrote it were saying 3 weeks ago, this is nowhere near ready to launch. But Obama went ahead and launched it, not out of a concern for your health, but because he needs that expected windfall of an estimated $200 billion a year in added tax revenues to dangle as bait for new lenders when they finally raise the debt ceiling. Because they can't just go back to the Federal Reserve and create new money out of there, or it exerts more downward pressure on the dollar internationally, and the dollar is already being abandoned internationally. So they have to go out to other countries, other private investors, and say, buy treasury bonds, buy some more of our debt, and they're not going to bite unless the government says, look, we've got these added tax revenues coming in from Obamacare, and we're going to pass a carbon tax, and it's safe for you to loan us money because we will make good on this no matter what, although obviously history puts the lie to that claim. Now, earlier today, Fox News was reporting that many companies, in finally looking closely at Obamacare, are choosing to just go ahead and pay the IRS fines rather than have to deal with the Obamacare system, which means employees at these companies aren't going to be getting the mandated health insurance. The companies will just, sign the check over to the IRS for the fines and lower benefits and wages and salaries to their workers to make up the shortfall. Now, if you go back and you look at Obamacare, which had no provision at all for any additional doctors to take care of the American people, but did create 1,600 new positions at the IRS for enforcement of Obamacare. And that tells you two things. First of all, it is a cash grab. That's all they're really thinking about, grabbing more money from you to prop up their little Ponzi scheme system. And the mere existence of enforcement proves that they know the people of the United States of America do not want Obamacare now that they know what it really entails, now that they're seeing how it raises their health insurance costs, raises the deductibles, intrudes into their private lives to an extraordinary degree. It's amazing how much information they're demanding you type into this Obamacare computer system before they even show you what your health insurance options are going to be. And apparently it also has a little provision in there to make sure that you're registered to vote. What's that got to do with health care? Obamacare is the beginning of the giant computer system that keeps track of all of our lives. And it's an absolute disaster. The people overwhelmingly are opposed to this thing. And Obama is still up there in the White House saying, I, by golly, am His Obamaness, King Barry the First, and you will do what I tell you, because that's the way the United States operates these days. Meanwhile, more eyebrows are being raised over the fact that these two high-ranking nuclear commanders have been fired in recent weeks over what appear to be very trivial issues. And, of course, this comes hard on the heel of reports that a nuclear weapon was transferred from wherever they're normally being kept to somewhere on the East Coast without the appropriate paper trail. And don't forget, of course, that situation with the missing nuke from the Minot Air Base a while back. And so somebody inside the military command is playing fast and loose with U.S. nuclear weapons. And either Obama is trying to cover that up by getting rid of these commanders or trying to basically call off somebody going rogue on behalf of Israel to set off a nuclear weapon inside the United States and say, see, we told you Iran had a bomb. Now, over in Russia, as you're probably aware over the weekend, the Nobel Peace Prize was issued to this chemical weapons organization. And a lot of people in Russia were wondering why Putin got snubbed for the Nobel Peace Prize, given that it was Putin who stepped in, acted like the only adult in the room, and secured this deal whereby Syria has surrendered and is allowing to be destroyed its chemical weapon arsenal. That fits the definition of a peacemaker right there. Putin headed off a U.S. attack on Syria, for which the U.S., I'm sure, will never forgive him. But in theory, that's what the Nobel Peace Prize is supposed to go for, and the Russian people are feeling very slighted. Now, my advice to Putin and the Russians is to forget it. It's no big deal. With the Nobel Peace Prize having gone to people like Barack Obama, Al Gore, Henry Kissinger, Shimon Peres, it's not like the award has any credibility left anyway. The world knows what Putin did. We all know what he did. We recognize his achievement, and we don't need a piece of metal to tell us who really accomplished peace, not just in Syria, but over the wider region, because forestalling the invasion of Syria forestalled the invasion of Iran. And the people of planet Earth, they recognize and will remember what Putin did. And because of the fact they gave the Peace Prize to Barack Obama before he'd ever actually done anything, and he's since proved himself to be a war president, The Peace Prize is discredited. I know when I was a kid growing up, oh, the Nobel Prize, that's the highest award you can win. And it gets politicized. And it really does lack credibility. And I think we've reached the stage where we realize that these gold medals and these plaques and all these things to hang on the wall are not handed out on the basis of merit, but merely as a stage prop to get the public to listen to these people over here spouting the official line because they're recognized authorities with all kinds of plaques on the wall, and pay no attention to these other people over here who are coming from logic, facts, and common sense, but don't get the awards to hang on the wall. It's part of the propaganda. It's part of the dodge. And we recognize that now. So Putin, don't fret about not getting the Nobel Peace Prize. It's not going to embellish your reputation, because we know that prize is a joke, and we know what you did. We will all stand up and we will applaud you. And that's got to count more than that piece of metal that came over from that very corrupted committee over there. Turning to the economy, we're hearing the word Euroscepticism again as more and more countries inside the Eurozone are getting into serious, serious trouble because they, like America, are enslaved to a private central bank that issues all of the public currency as a loan at interest, with the inevitable result that the nations sink deeper and deeper into debt until the bankers just come in and say, well, you can't pay off this debt that we created out of thin air, so we get to take everything. Now, a survey of 8 major European Union countries is showing that Euroscepticism is the majority viewpoint, meaning they don't think the European Union is going to hold together much longer because it was created with a built-in self-destruct mechanism called the European Central Bank. And things are really bad over there. Italy is now going to sell off 50 historic sites to try and pay off their debt, including a fortress, a cardinal's palace, an entire island in the Venetian lagoon. And this is a repeat of what we saw last year when Greece was forced to sell off some of their islands to foreign buyers to pay off this manufactured debt. Now, I would argue that the government of Italy has no right to sell off the collective property of the Italian people, just as I argue the U.S. government does not have the right to sell off or close our national parks and other public assets. But for the money junkies, confiscation of the public property is the last and final step to bringing the world back to feudalism, in which their lordships own everything, including our physical person, and we, the people, own nothing at all. We spend our lives toiling away to rent permission to be alive on the face of planet Earth. That's where they're going with this thing. They're so close to bringing the entire planet back to feudalism. And they're getting desperate to complete it, even as the people of the world wake up and realize that's what's going on, and that's the real reason for this private central banking scam of issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. And that is not the way this country was started. When this country was started, the public currency was handled as a public utility, there to serve the people and commerce, not to reap unearned benefits for a bunch of private money junkies. Now, over in Greece, as you're probably aware, their government is under fire, first of all, because most people don't think it's a legitimate government because of the way it came into power. Remember, the first Greek elections, the anti-banker, anti-bailout party won. The pro-bankers refused to form a coalition to force a second election. The second election was marked by rampant and obvious vote fraud. So the Greek people don't even see that current government as legitimate, and now it's engaged in a major crackdown on opposition. They're arresting opposition politicians. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're talking about what's going on over in Greece, where the government of Greece, which is seen by many as illegitimate, they're pro-banker, pro-European Central Bank, pro-bailout, pro-austerity, and they achieved power after 2 elections, the second of which was very obviously riddled with massive vote fraud. Now, because of the rising protest and discontent, the Greek government is starting to crack down on every political party that opposed it in the elections, and they're starting with the so-called Golden Dawn, which is being promoted as this Nazi, fascist, dictatorial, dangerous criminal organization. But Golden Dawn was one of the parties that was opposed to austerity and banker bailouts. They were concerned about, they ran on a platform of curing Greece's unemployment, and they did win seats in the parliament. And now the Greek government is cracking down on them and throwing their members of parliament in key members in prison. That's not democracy, which is weird because democracy was invented in Greece in ancient times. And here we have Greece acting like any other third world dictatorship. We're going to enslave you to the bankers, and anybody who says otherwise gets to go to jail. Now, the current government of Greece is moving to very close relations with Israel. And apparently Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is applauding the Greek Prime Minister Antonis Samaras for the tough stand against opposition parties. And that tells you all you need to know about the current Greek government. We're going to grab a phone call here. Andrea in Oklahoma. Aloha, Andrea. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes. Yesterday they reported on CBS about the freak snowstorm that occurred up north in North Dakota. And they were showing, of course, they received close to 4 feet of snow. All these cattle that froze to death. We're talking about every cow was covered out there. Of course, this is global warming at its best, but it's heartbreaking to see that they lost everything.
They absolutely did. It's something, I think at last count it's over 100,000 cattle were killed. It's devastating their beef industry, and of course that means beef prices for the rest of the country are going to go right through the roof.
Yes, and I know my grandfather did this. He would put his cows he would rent land maybe 15, 20 miles away, and then when they needed hay, he'd run out there and drop off hay and stuff. And I don't know if this is their policy. I just got back from Flagstaff. And you see miles and miles of cows, and there's no house out there. In Oklahoma, we have planted lots and lots of cedars. They are great for animals to get up under, yes. And they break winds. And the snow could have piled up and made a drift on one side, and those cows could have had a place to find shelter. And instead, they found they didn't have their winter coats yet. And they found them all huddled together trying to stay warm out from all the cold.
Well, there's all kinds of, let me cut in here. There's all kinds of things you can do. First of all, there are still cattle drives out in the American West between the summer grounds and the winter grounds. Most cattle ranchers do have a certain amount of barnage that they can use to put the cows in when the storm hits, but they got caught off guard because all we've been hearing in the corporate media is global warming, snow a thing of the past, snow a thing of the past. The IPCC came out reselling this whole human-caused global warming thing, and all those cattle ranchers, and I think it was mostly in South Dakota, not North Dakota, they bought into it, and they said, all right, we don't need to move our cows, we don't need to make any preparations, it's going to be a mild winter, and here they got absolutely slammed by it. And I had a discussion with a CBS News producer who keeps sending me stories to include in my website, and I wrote back and I said, is CBS going to report on this massive record-setting snowstorm that killed all these cattle? And he said, that's just for the local affiliates, the nation doesn't care and they don't need to know, kind of an attitude.
Yeah, ever since the Caribbean, where they had the BP spill, according to what I've heard from England, the weather has been horrendous over there for the last 2 winters, and they've experienced the same thing with such horrific snowstorms that it has totally killed every animal out there in the meadows. And
it's killed a lot of people, too. It's killed a lot of, pensioners who are in their home and they're not able to pay for the additional heating oil and gas. It's not just in Great Britain, here in the United States of America. And it really doesn't have that much to do with the BP oil spill, which, by the way, is in the Gulf of Mexico, not the Caribbean, because these massive snowstorms and heavy winters were starting even before the BP spill. Remember that one year when the UK Met Office was saying this will be the mildest winter on record, and it turned out to be one of the heaviest they'd had in 20 years, because they're still trying to sell this global warming to get a carbon tax from you, and everybody who buys into the official line are being caught totally by surprise. Communities are cutting back spending on snowplow maintenance or acquisition of new snowplows. We had stories from last winter about communities who didn't buy as much road grit as they needed to deal with icy roads, and they ran out halfway through the winter. And this just happened in North Dakota. These cattle ranchers were just entirely too trusting of the corporate media and the government saying it'll be a mild winter, and they got caught completely off guard. And, you know, I think these cattle ranchers ought to mount a class action lawsuit against the IPCC and everybody out there saying it was going to be a mild winter. And again, all of this goes back to the solar output, which is the dominant control of climate here on Earth. And the whole computer modeling that IPCC put out to prove that humans were causing global warming specifically excluded exterior factors like undersea volcanoes and solar activity. Right now, the sun is at the lowest level of activity seen in the last 100 years, which basically is as long as they've been able to scientifically study the sun. And it looks like we're going into a new Maunder minimum, and we're going to have a very, very hard winter. And you'd better be prepared for it. And, you know, everything that you need to do to keep your pipes from freezing, to keep your the coolant in your car from freezing, it's going to be a hard winter. We're already seeing that hit.
Well, I'm mad as you know what, and I hate it every time they bring up global warming, and I wish they'd stop because, you know, things like this are happening and weather's just weather, but
no,
I don't know what we can do about it other than I'd like to fire them. I want them out of there.
We can just scream bovine excrement at them every time they come out with human-caused global warming, because the agenda behind that hoax is the same as it is behind Obamacare. The U.S. government is desperate to have new tax revenues coming in that they can use as bait to get people to lend it money once the debt ceiling is raised. And it's a complete lie and a hoax. It's just a cash grab. And that's really all it is. This government's only priority is to somehow get more money out of the American people so they can justify getting new lenders to come in and try and fund the operation a little bit further. And they know it's going to crash eventually. Right now, everybody in Congress and Barack Obama himself, their goal is to put the final crash off until it's somebody else's administration that will go down in the history book as presiding over the crash of the United States of America. And that's all they're thinking about right now.
Well, every time they talk about impeachment, it gets my hopes up, and it's like, let's just get the rest of them out of there, and I'll let you go. Thank you for all you do.
All right, thank you. Yeah, we got to impeach the entire government, because what's going wrong with this country, it isn't just the Republicans, it isn't just the Democrats, it isn't just President Obama, it wasn't just President Bush. It is a systemic problem with a government that has been completely co-opted by the financial interests of this country, and that is why it is a fascist economic state tending toward fascist dictatorship. And Obamacare and its intrusion into your personal medical care, I mean, there's a provision in Obamacare that says the state has priority over the parents for deciding what medical care children will get. They're treating you like livestock. They're not treating you like human beings deserving of rights and respect. It's coming on. All right, we got to take a break for Phyllis Shapley and commercials. We got another caller waiting on the line that we'll get to just as soon as we come back from these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to grab some phone calls. Ralph in California. Aloha. Thank you for waiting. What's on your mind today?
Hello, Michael. It's nice. It's a pleasure to talk to you again. About the EBT fiasco. Over in Louisiana, apparently they had unlimited buying power.
Yeah.
Walmart.
They emptied out the stores.
Well, you know, and it was a matter of character of, it tells you the people there or just how people would react against character-wise.
Well, now, wait a minute. Let's be fair here. You know, obviously with these food programs that Claire and I are involved in, we talk to a lot of people on food stamps, and it's simply not sufficient. And so if all of a sudden you're in your store and the card is showing no limit, obviously you're going to stock up on food, you know, to be able to feed your family for a while. So I don't actually blame the people who took advantage of that glitch. One tiny bit.
My question is, well, if it's food, I don't have a problem with food. If it's like buying TVs, if they're able to, I don't know. They didn't really go into detail on that. Or they were just stuffing their carts. And I understand in that sense, but I think what I'm going at is I think it was by design that the glitch was supposed to be and see how people would react. Did you say there was other areas where people could not use their EBT cards?
For the vast majority of the country, the cards were not usable at all. They weren't able to get any food at all. And if this was by design to see how people are going to react, it's not like we don't know how people are going to react when their dependency on the government gets shut off. They're going to get very, very angry. The fact that Louisiana went the other way and had unlimited funds in those cards, I think it really was a glitch, and it basically shows that the government is spending so little on the social structure that these problems are going to show up. All the money is going into military development, and they're not even doing very well over there when you look at the F-35. I think it's just a sign of the inherent weakness in our current governmental structure. They're just spending the absolute minimum to get these things together. They're put into operation with lots of flaws in them. I don't buy into the idea that this was intentional, certainly because the timing, when the American people are already getting angry and storming into Washington, D.C., cutting off the food stamps, that's a very reckless thing to do. And if this government thinks that the American people are going to be cowed down because the food stamps are being cut off, I think it did provoke the exact opposite reaction.
Sure, I agree. I think people just start looking at the administration as it'd just be a negative, bad PR move.
Yeah, it is, and we've seen so many of these bad PR moves coming out of Washington, D.C., and either they're all on SSRIs or they're still trying to play the game by the rules that worked in the 1950s and 1960s at the height of the Cold War, and those days are gone forever.
I agree.
That's why you have Jay Rockefeller out there saying, the Internet should never have been invented. Well, what he means is the Internet should never have been allowed to go public because it was originally created just for government and military use. And it was never intended to be available to the general public. But it is, and that's the new reality. All right, we're going to let you go, Ralph. Switch over to Dave in Sacramento. Aloha, Dave. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Dave, are you there? Okay, I guess not. Let's switch over to George in Texas and see if Dave comes back in a little bit. George, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Okay, we seem to be having some problem with our phone system here. Can we get George in Texas? All right, well, we'll come back to the calls here in a little tiny bit. It's that darn hamster in the wire wheel that powers all of this stuff here. I guess they forgot to feed him this morning. Now, Israel is making a big deal over this supposed tunnel they found reaching from inside Gaza into Israel. And they're saying, oh, it was obviously a terror tunnel. And because of this tunnel, Israel has now cut off all construction supplies going into Gaza. Now, I am very suspicious of this for a wide variety of reasons. First of all, anytime I've ever seen a video of the tunnels that are being used to smuggle food and medicine into Gaza, they're always just holes in the dirt with maybe a little wood shoring. This tunnel was well constructed with concrete walls, concrete arches overhead, conduits with wiring and cable all along the wall. It looks far too good to be built by Hamas, because with construction materials in short supply, they wouldn't be using that much construction material on this tunnel. Plus, the end of the tunnel in Israel was not masked or concealed. And I think this was a tunnel that Israel was using to get agent provocateurs into Gaza with rockets to fling at Israel to justify these military operations, and they decided not to use it anymore and make it go public. So they've got an excuse to once again slam the blockade against the people of Gaza. And I think that's our safest first assumption here. All right, let's see if we can get back on the phones again. Do we have Dave in Sacramento?
No.
We don't.
No, you have.
Is this Art?
Hey, Mike, how's it going?
All right, Art, how you doing there? What's on your mind today?
Talking about food stamps, I find it a little humorous. We hear all this talk about when the system goes down, the economy collapses, blah, blah, blah. 3 days worth of on your grocery store shelves, and I kind of, and this is going to get into food stamps, but I kind of have to laugh when I hear that, because anyone who, like myself, has been around when you have a hurricane or something bearing down on you, the stores are bare within 24 hours. So if we have an economic collapse, do you honestly think you're going to have 3 days worth of food on the shelves in the grocery stores? Common sense tells you absolutely freaking not.
No, I remember the last time we had a tsunami warning coming in here to Oahu, and, I was down at the supermarket when it opened, and people were fighting over shopping carts trying to get in there and get bottled water and everything. You're absolutely right. When there's a major crash, everybody's going to head for the supermarket and get everything that they can, which is, obviously common sense. You should have a certain amount of food on hand in your home to get through this disruption.
Right, and that brings me to what I was calling in about.
Yes.
So we know that this won't be just on the Gulf states. This will be a nationwide thing.
Yes.
So let's look at what happened in all of these states where people were just livid over the fact that their food stamp cards wouldn't work, their EBT cards wouldn't work. And I mean, they were talking about it's time to riot in the streets of blood. Now, just think, if that was what you had, that kind of panic just for a temporary glitch in the system, imagine, let's just say, we know that we're expecting some kind of event somewhere. We got missing nukes. We got this whole thing going on with the commanders in the nuclear arsenal being fired and all of this crazy crap going on. We got the Grid X exercise coming up in November. What do you think would happen if what we've been expecting, some sort of false flag, some sort of event, maybe a series of false flags? We've got, 10 or so different exercises coming back to back, plus the October 1st deadline for preparations in Region 3, FEMA Region 3. Can you imagine if our greatest fears become manifest during this Grid X exercise and no one can access not just their EBTs, but their bank accounts and everything else? What the perfect opportunity.
No, it absolutely is. The question is, the government is prepared to wage war on the American people. The question is, can they wage war on all of them? And the answer to that one is no. And I think that's why earlier this year they were trying to set up a confrontation that could be used to justify a national emergency, but it was a small, controlled confrontation they knew they could win. I think that was the plan behind Adam Kokesh's armed march into D.C. Then they were trying to get race riots going with George Zimmerman. That didn't work because the American people are now very suspicious of everything the government is doing. But when the economy crashes and the banks start grabbing your money in your safety deposit boxes and EBT won't work anymore, you will have nationwide riots, and this government really can't put all those down at the same time. They don't have the resources or the manpower, and it just, when they start doing those kind of things, it'll only underscore the fact it is no longer a legitimate government of the people, and that'll just get things going even worse. I'd like to avoid it, but it does seem we're headed that way. We'll be right back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're going to go back to the phones. Jim in Georgia. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Jim in Georgia, are you there? Okay, do we have Dave in Sacramento? Okay, we seem to be having some issues with our telephone system today. And, all right, so let's get back to the news here, and we'll try and get back to those callers as soon as we can. And I apologize for all the technical glitches we're suffering today. All right, we are getting word that Israeli settlers have once again stormed Al-Aqsa Mosque, running in there and raising the flag of Israel inside the mosque. As you know, it's a very contentious piece of ground. Personally, I think the world would be much better off if an asteroid came down and just wiped out that whole area. What was that wonderful line from the movie Kingdom of Heaven? Every rock, every stone, everything that drives men mad. They're absolutely right. Now, just imagine Israelis invading your local church and hoisting the Star of David over it, which is, of course, what the flag of Israel is. And now you'd understand why the Muslims are upset. We're going to go back to the phones here. Dave in Sacramento. Aloha, Dave. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
First, the global warming issue. I kept track of the temperatures in the South Pole during our summer, which is their winter. And for months on end, the temperature at the South Pole was recorded as extremely cold.
Yes.
So when they say extremely cold down there, That's cold. Okay.
Well, we know that the Arctic ice extent grew something like 60% over last year, and obviously Mother Nature is not going along with all the dire warnings of the carbon Nazis from 10 years ago, and they're basically trying to use the corporate media to convince people to not look out their windows at the snow and ice, but just believe these very expensively produced graphics that tell you the world is still warming, it's all humans' fault, and you have to pay a carbon tax and buy carbon credits. And it's all just a cash grab by a government that is absolutely dead broke, can't get its spending under control, and their only solution to every problem is inevitably find some way to take more money away from the American people. The message from this government and Wall Street is always the same when you get down to the bottom of it. You must make do with less so we can have more. You must make do with less so we can have more. And that is getting to be a very, very tough sell in this day and age.
Absolutely. The second thing is how the government can control the weather, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember during the Clinton era?
Yes. Hello? Dave, are you there? Okay, we seem to have lost Dave in the middle of his talk about the Clinton era. Can we switch over to Jim in Georgia? Jim, are you there?
This is Jim in Georgia. How you doing?
I'm doing fine. Very glad to be hearing you.
They're playing with your signal again today.
It's that hamster. That they didn't feed the hamster, and he just keeps stumbling in that wire wheel.
I know. You're on the air. You're off the air. Michael, I wanted to talk about, they came out with the cost of living this year. They said it only went up 1.5. It's the lowest since 1975.
Mm-hmm.
The government for the SSI and the disabled people. And it tickles the hell out of me because our cost of living here, basically, groceries went up $16.75 a week. That's $871 a year. Our insurance and everything. I figure out it's gone up 5.6 this year. And I know you help feed hungry people and shelters and stuff like that. And you know yourself it's gone up more than 1.5.
Well, the government's official cost of living increase is cherry-picked from indicators, and they exclude cost of food and cost of fuel in order to get a number that is politically expedient. Just like they rig the unemployment numbers, just like they rig the stock market, it's all carefully crafted illusion.
But I remember back in the Reagan years, he eliminated housing and automobiles from the cost of living.
Yes.
Right. So people don't understand. Of course, I know gasoline's gone down 40 cents a gallon here, but
not
still
out here.
Higher, last year. Well, here I think it's $3.08 a gallon. Some places, but
it's about $4.60 a gallon here in Hawaii right now.
My God. Well, of course, you're living on an island, so I know when I was in out in the islands, past you during in the service. We had to bring everything in from Hawaii, and of course the prices were higher. But no, I feel sorry for the younger people and the older people because they're lying. They're lying to us so bad it's pathetic, and I don't know what to do. Like I say, my grocery bill, buying the same items is $16.75 a week. That's $871 more a year. That's just that. My car insurance has gone up 19%. And my homeowners went up $400 because they said we live in a path where there's bad weather. So.
Yeah, the costs are definitely going up. And again, the official U.S. government cost of living index is computed from a list of cherry-picked indicators in order to get a low number with which to propagandize the people. But they do exclude those areas of costs that are going up very high, like food, fuel, housing, insurance, various other things. It's just another made-up number to try and lull the masses into a false sense of security, or at the very least to go on selling this lie that, the economy is doing really well, and if you personally are suffering, somehow it's all your own fault, so kindly shut up and stop bothering the politicians.
Well, I just wondered, I know you help needy people in shelters and that, and what is the cost, your cost gone up, would you say, percentage-wise?
Ooh, that's kind of a hard question because we've got to deal with a local food provider where we're getting their, one day before expire stuff, and it's sort of a, come and go situation. So I don't think it's an accurate indicator. But for our own personal groceries, I'd say it's probably gone up about 20% in the last year.
My God. Well, Michael, keep up the good work, and the people are not stupid. They see what's going on, and eventually, I know in the South, when you go to a union meeting, we had 2,500 employees, and 56 would show up to the meeting, So, but because they didn't stick together, but people are starting to stick together now. So
they very much,
thank you, Michael.
They very much are. All right, thank you very much. We're going to switch over to Scott in Wisconsin. Scott, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
All right, hey Mikey, how you doing today, big guy? I want to give kudos to Art that called in with that information and that. He's a man of real good knowledge and wisdom. Mikey, you remember way back, I can't remember, I was a little smaller, when they had those holidays come around and he said, oh, use your card and you can do whatever you can to buy whatever and don't bring cash. I didn't even know about this glitch in the radar over this food stamp thing, Mikey, but I'll tell you right now, Art and I have been calling in about the situation coming up with these steps in the fall, and people got to I'm telling you, get prepared now, because like you were saying, with a little situation with that tsunami coming in, the situation, getting prepared. But Mike, I wanted to share this with you. Last week, I was in the parking lot at Menards, and I had a group of guys in a car, and they said, "Do you have a light?" And that kind of created a spark inside of me. So I went over and talked to them about the situation of what was going out east, and they were like, "Wow, man! Oh my gosh!" They were just totally sitting there with their mouths open, looking at me.
Yep.
And I said one thing, Mike. I don't know if you ever watched the
okay,
road.
Scott, I got to cut you off for a commercial break. When we come back from the commercial, I want you to continue where you are. We'll be right back after these words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to Scott in Wisconsin. And, Scott, you'd apparently met some individuals who asked you for a light, and...
Well, anyways, I was telling them about the situation, what Art was talking about. I had my sheet out there, basically my only copy. I always use right off what's our RBN. And then he was just sitting there saying, "I told you guys they want to kill us all." And I was like, "Wow, dude, I didn't want to shock you that bad." But I was something that I wanted to talk to you about, Mike, and it's a hard one to spill out. And I'm just going to say this, and then I'll leave it off the air. But if you ever watched the movie The Road, there was some scenes in there that were very horrifying. And it was with people harvesting other people. And I'll tell you right now that if the grid goes down, and I mentioned this to these guys in this car, and I'll tell you what, Mike, I mean this in my heart. I would never attempt to eat another person. But I'll tell you what, there are predators out there, when they start starving, that wouldn't hesitate to go after people.
Well,
so you better have some ammunition in that. So, Michael, thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, look what happened at Donner's Summit that crashed. I guess it was a soccer team down in Ecuador. I'm reaching into the dusty closet of my memory on that one. And, of course, the history of Rapa Nui, Easter Island, which descended into cannibalism when their environmental system, economic system collapsed. Yeah, it's going to happen. Every major race of humankind has gone through a period of cannibalism, and it's a very, very real possibility. And when the system crashes, those of you who are prepared are going to do okay, and those of you who just think, the government will last forever and the government will take care of me, you're in for a very, very rude shock. And again, our common sense advice to everybody listening to our show is you should have, 2 to 3 months of long-term storable food that doesn't require electrically supported refrigeration on your premises, hidden away. You should have weapons and ammunition to protect your home from the people who aren't prepared. And you should have no more of your wealth in the banks than you need to meet your immediate obligations, and you keep the rest under your own control at home, and you should be putting part of it into physical silver and gold. As long as the financial charlatans are working this hard to keep silver and gold prices down, this is your opportunity to buy in. Because in the long run, it will always, always go up. Alrighty, I think we do not have any more callers on the line right now, if I'm correct here. Getting back to the news, we have been seeing Israel more and more resort to screaming anti-Semite at everybody. Abe Foxman responded to the recent Pew Research poll that showed most American Jews do not agree with or support Israel's policy, and he said they're all being anti-Semites. And now it's reached a point where there was this interesting article over at 12160.info where basically Israel's taking the position that the entire world are anti-Semites, and that's why Israel has to do what it does. And, of course, my first response to that is, well, if the entire world is anti-Semitic, I guess that is the natural state of being. And, of course, that's utter nonsense. Now, anti-Semitism is hating a particular people because of their ethnic background or religion. And that would include not only the Jews, but also the Arabs who are Semitic. Opposition to Israel has nothing to do with who they are or what their religion is. Opposition to Israel's government rests firmly in how it behaves and what it does. And Israel gets by screaming anti-Semite, you're a Jew hater, because they don't want to actually talk about what's going on. They don't really have answers for the questions. Their only answer is the world hates us, we must be on guard, we have to have nukes, they can't have nukes, we have to be in control of the world's money, and so forth and so on. And it's all based on their religious obsessions. It's not based in reality. And Israel's literally always looking for what's called confirmation bias. When somebody is firmly enslaved to a belief, they look for things that will confirm that belief and cannot see those things that don't confirm it. We saw that back in the Middle Ages during the witch hunters, where people were paid to go find witches, and they saw witches everywhere. And anything that happened unusual was a confirmation of witchcraft. And anything that called into question the validity of the belief in witchcraft was simply ignored, or the person was burned at the stake. It's a very, very dangerous situation when you have that kind of mental illness as a national governmental policy. Even the people in Israel don't support the government of Israel. They had riots and protests all over there. They put up a guillotine in a plaza in Tel Aviv. There's a clear, unambiguous message for you. Now, the good news is, as I've mentioned many times before, Israel has played anti-Semitism so many times and so often, people just aren't paying attention any longer. It's lost its shock value. 20, 30 years ago, if somebody said, oh, you're an anti-Semite, no, I'm not an anti-Semite, and you'd work to prove that you did not deserve that label. And these days, nobody cares anymore. You're an anti-Semite. All right, if you think so, I don't care. Just don't care anymore. Now, speaking of Israel, do you remember last year when the body of Yasser Arafat was exhumed with the permission of his wife in order to conduct an autopsy as to his cause of death? And they were looking for evidence that he had been poisoned by polonium-210 based on studies of his personal effects that had been in his possession at the time he died, being contaminated with polonium-210. So there was a big back and forth about the autopsy, and they had the autopsy, and supposedly the results from that autopsy were due to be released last June. This is now October. And for some reason, the results of the autopsy have never been made public. It might be embarrassing to somebody, but apparently the British medical journal Lancet just put out a peer-reviewed research paper going back and looking at the results of the research done by the Swiss scientists, and they found exactly the same thing. Yasser Arafat's personal effects and samples from when he was on the verge of death are heavily contaminated with polonium-210. The official autopsy has been politicked into invisibility, although the usual anonymous sources were claiming that the autopsy showed he died of AIDS, with absolutely no support for that whatsoever. Now, the thing about polonium-210, and it's been used as an assassination weapon many times, such as Alexander Litvinenko, who was a suspected Russian-Israel double agent, was killed with polonium-210. And polonium-210, it doesn't just kill the victim. It is a most lingering painful, and horrible way to die. So they're not just killing their victims. They are deliberately picking the most cruel method to do it. And it appears that's what happened to Yasser Arafat. And all of the politicking to keep the official autopsy results hidden from the public appears to have failed, because now we've got these Swiss scientists who came out and discovered polonium-210, contaminating his artifacts, now been confirmed by a peer-reviewed article in Lancet, the British Medical Journal. Now, getting over to Iran, as they head into the P5+1, we've seen Israel and the U.S. adopt what they're calling the Red Line strategy, and they're co-opting the name from Netanyahu. But basically the strategy is an old one, of going into a negotiation by saying, you must agree to something first before we will even talk. And, of course, what Israel is promoting and the United States is echoing is that Iran will shut down all of its nuclear infrastructure. Not just its non-existent weapons program, but the power station, the medical isotopes, everything. Just scrape it out down to the ground and throw it away. That's the opening move of Israel and the United States. Iran has come back reasserting that it is a signature to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, along with the United States, which gives it the legal right to have nuclear power, medical isotopes, and other non-weapon industrial uses of nuclear technology. And Iran has come out with their red line, saying that sanctions have to be reduced before they'll sit down at the table. So already on both sides, the P5+1 is going to accomplish nothing. Nothing at all. Now, despite that, John Kerry, in a recent statement to AIPAC, the Israeli lobby that has a hammerlock on the U.S. government, but it's starting to slip, is basically saying the window for diplomacy with Iran is now cracking open. It is possible that we could achieve a peaceful resolution to the Iran nuclear crisis, which doesn't really exist anywhere except in the imagination of Israel's government. And again, in all the years of inspections and surveillance and monitoring by the IAEA, there has been no hard evidence of weapons development by Iran. None at all. All the weapons development is over in Israel, which still refuses to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty, refuses IAEA inspections, is known to be building nuclear weapons, was caught trying to sell nuclear weapons to other countries, and they're pointing the finger at Iran and saying, they're bad, go hurt them, hurt them. Got to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. And aloha from, and welcome back to our show. Okay, do we have a caller on the line, Bill from Idaho? Okay, I guess we don't. All right. I was having trouble interpreting the little paw prints of the hamster on our screen here. So, anyway, up in Afghanistan, now, you probably remember Afghanistan. We've been at war in Afghanistan longer than we were in World War I or World War II. And Obama came into office in 2008 promising to end the war and bring our kids home, and then it's sort of mission creep, and then they were talking about pulling our kids home from Afghanistan next year in 2014. Well, looks like they were fudging about that one, too, because Kerry is over there in Afghanistan talking with Afghan President Hamid Karzai, who began as a consultant for UNICAL all the way back in Congress in the 1990s, saying that they had to change the government of Afghanistan because, gosh darn, that Taliban, they weren't going to sell U.S. oil companies a pipeline right-of-way for the price the U.S. oil companies wanted to pay. And so it's just cheaper to send other people's children into Afghanistan to take the place over, get rid of the Taliban, start the opium poppies blooming again, bumper crops of opium there, and get their little pipeline. But in order to keep the place under control with the Afghan people who don't like outside governments coming in and installing former oil company executives as the president, they've had to keep the U.S. military presence there. And so now they're in negotiation with Hamid Karzai for U.S. forces to remain in Afghanistan after 2014. There's a second reason for that. When the U.S. invades Iran, Russia has already said they will pour in material support to Iran, turn it into a new Vietnam, and grind the United States down in a war of attrition, which Russia has the economy to do, and the U.S. does not have the economy to withstand. Now, supporting Iran by air will be very expensive, so they're going to be relying on ground transportation, ground convoys, and there are two major routes for Russia to supply Iran. One is through Afghanistan, and the other is through that land bridge between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. which is why the U.S. has been trying to stir up trouble between Georgia and Ossetia and these other regions in order to blockade those tunnels through the Caucasus Mountains. And so now, if the U.S. is going to invade Iran, and they are, they have to keep their forces in Afghanistan to be able to prevent Russian supply convoys coming on through that way, and that's why they're talking about keeping our kids in Afghanistan after 2014, because we're going to need them to fight the Russians. And supposedly they have a deal to keep our troops in Afghanistan, but it is stumbling on the issue of jurisdiction. And that's a very polite word for the fact that American troops in Afghanistan are committing all kinds of heinous crimes, killing innocent people, rapes, robberies, burglaries, and because of the current arrangement with the United States of America, they cannot be prosecuted by the Afghan authorities. They're immune. Afghanistan is told, don't worry, military justice will take care of these crimes, which basically never happens. So that's the deal. But Hamid Karzai is saying they're close to a deal. Now, Hamid Karzai himself is at the end of his term. He's only going to be in office for another 5 or 6 months. And so this is his leaving office political favor to his American masters, who, after all, did make him the president of Afghanistan. But the underlying point here is that every time the U.S. government has said we're going to end the situation in Afghanistan and bring our troops home, they have lied to you, they have lied to you, they have lied to you, they have lied to you. So that's another reason why anything this government or corporate media says should be taken with a gigantic grain of salt. Protests in Sudan are picking up again. They're very unhappy over there. Now, over the weekend, very interesting story broke. And it involves a gentleman by the name of Larry Nichols. Now, Larry Nichols is a figure from the days of the Clinton administration. He was involved with them when Clinton was the governor of Arkansas. He was overseeing the U.S. end of that Iran-Contra pipeline out of the Mena airport. They were running all this money laundering operation through Whitewater, Flowerwood, Castle Grand, all these land flips going on, Madison Guarantee, and all the payouts going through the Arkansas Development Finance Authority. And Larry Nichols later on went public with some of the bad things the Clintons had been doing and their involvement in U.S.-sanctioned drug trafficking. And over the weekend, Larry Nichols went public saying that he worked as a hitman for the Clintons. Now, because murder does not have a statute of limitations, he's inviting reprisals against himself. But if he was doing these crimes at the behest of the Clinton crime cartel, they're involved too. They can't arrest Larry Nichols for murder without dragging the Clintons into it. And I think maybe Larry Nichols is very leery of seeing Hillary run for the White House in 2016, as am I. And paired with that article at the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com, I relinked to a very old page from my website, the Clinton Body Count, about all the people who were associated with the Clintons who died under very mysterious circumstances. First and foremost, White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster, which is the case that inadvertently launched my career as a truth activist, a blogger, and talk show radio host. 20 years ago, this next spring, I will have been doing this for 20 years. And I never imagined it was going to last this long or that I would wind up doing this as a full-time occupation. But with Larry Nichols now coming out and basically confessing that he worked as a paid hitman for the Clintons, that's probably going to stir up a real hornet's nest. Or, more likely, the corporate media and the government will just pretend they didn't hear it, and that will be the end of it. Because they can't go after Larry Nichols without dragging the Clintons into the mess. Now then. More allegations here that the World Health Organization conspired and colluded to cover up the serious problems in Iraq resulting from the use of depleted uranium munitions. There's been an epidemic of severe birth abnormalities among not only the Iraqi people, but among our returning Iraq veterans. Now, the depleted uranium munitions, when they are still solid, are sort of kind of relatively safe. The problem is when they are used and fired, the depleted uranium vaporizes, and it mixes in with the dust. And when the wind comes up, those sandstorms they get, the dust blows everywhere, people inhale it, including our own troops. And our Iraq veterans, after they return home from service and they get married and they start a family, they are experiencing a major epidemic of severe birth abnormalities. What a horrible, tragic punishment for taking part in America's military adventurism. And this is one of the things that the U.S. government has tried to hide from the American people about how the use of depleted uranium just absolutely curses the target nation with all of these medical problems. We even saw that in the aftermath of Vietnam, where Agent Orange was triggering serious health consequences for the people of Vietnam, including major birth defects. But the war hawks, their whole attitude is whatever it takes to win now, and if it creates problems, that's somebody else's problem to deal with in the future. Very, very short-sighted. I want to talk a little bit about the economy as we head up here to the top of the hour. We've been talking about the payday loan companies and how they're basically operating almost as licensed loan sharks, getting to be huge, huge, abusive practices against people who have been harmed by the economy. Now we're seeing this very interesting story out of the Scotsman.com, where some banks are now charging usurious interest on their short-term loans, their get-over-the-crisis loans. They're starting to function on the same level as the payday loan firms, as little more than legalized loan sharking operations. And people who are forced to resort to these payday loan companies, it doesn't really help them. It plunges them further into debt. It's called vulture capitalism, hitting the people when they're down. The system is not geared to helping the ordinary people deal with the economic crisis created by the money junkies. It's again another opportunity for the money junkies to take even more away from the people. Banks do not exist to serve the community, the nation, or the people. They serve themselves. Most of their business activity these days is engaged in speculation. The old model of you putting money in a savings account and the bank loaning it out at interest to run their business, that's just a tiny fraction of the business model now. Most of it is just runaway, rampant speculation. We'll be right back after Phyllis Schlafly and some commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And way back when this whole mortgage-backed security fraud imploded, Iceland took a different approach to the problem than the United States did. Iceland threw the crooked bankers in prison. They kicked out the government that helped the banks loot the people to cover their shortfalls, and they wrote off all of the debt that was created through fraud and manipulation. And Iceland's economy is doing very well. You wouldn't know that to listen to the corporate media, which is attempting to portray Iceland as not having gained anything at all, and therefore there's no reason for people of the United States of America to call for crooked bankers to be thrown in jail, because we all know what swell people bankers are and how they don't think about anything except the welfare of the entire nation. Blah, blah, blah. We're now seeing the same thing with Hungary. Now, Hungary, not too long ago, basically changed their national economy. They delinked from the IMF, and they're moving away from allowing private central banks to issue the public currencies alone at interest. And we have been seeing a lot of Hungary bashing going on, especially in the financial press. Because, again, if you go back and you read or watch the video for All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, anytime a nation breaks free from private central banks being allowed to issue the public currencies alone at interest, every other nation on earth that is enslaved to that banking system will find some way to destroy them or make war on them. And how they're going to sell us a war with Hungary, I don't know. Or we may see a repeat of the global boycott against Hungary, which would be a repeat of the global boycott against Germany when Germany kicked out their private central bank and went with a government-issued value-based currency that turned Germany's economy around. They called it the German miracle, and it absolutely terrified all the private banks in the world, which basically ultimately led to World War II. But the reality is that more and more nations are dropping the dollar and moving away from private central banking than the U.S. can conquer. Yes, the U.S. was able to conquer Iraq for daring to sell their oil for euros, and yes, the U.S. was able to conquer Libya for having a state central bank and a gold dinar and saying they would sell their oil only for gold dinars. But the U.S. is already militarily and economically exhausted. They can't keep it up, and it's going to fail. Ben Swan was reporting that California has now nullified the NDAA indefinite detention provisions, say it will not be allowed to operate inside California. Apparently, Oxford, Massachusetts just passed a city ordinance saying NDAA does not apply. And they are on solid constitutional grounds because this whole National Defense Authorization Act indefinite detention without trial is contrary to the constitutional protections. And it's leading up to yet another crisis between states' rights versus the central federal government. And we know what the agenda of the central federal government is you do what we tell you to do. And the states are saying, no, we stand on the Constitution. Because that Constitution and that Bill of Rights is the contract under which we, the people, allow that central federal government to manage this nation for the benefit of the nation and its people. And if the folks in D.C. do not want to play by those rules, there is one and only one legitimate course of action, and that is immediate resignation. We're going to go to the phones here. George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome back. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike?
Doing fine.
I have a feeling these EBT glitches, I think, happen in a few select areas. So I know a few cashiers that work for Walmart, work for H-E-B, and work for Kroger, and they had no trouble with their EBT systems all weekend. But yet in the 9th Ward in Houston, the EBT went down.
Yeah, it was sporadic, and like we were saying earlier in the show, in Louisiana, the glitch went the other way, and basically all the cards had no limit at all. So it's another major computer screw-up.
Oh, and the thing is, talking about Iceland, I'm just starting to have a suspicion that certain broadcasters who claim to be in our movement will not talk about Iceland or Hungary, and I really think they want to keep this crisis going on because they enjoy the notoriety that comes with it, instead of, trying to get this country back and resuming their normal lives once we get our country back.
Well, you may actually have something there. I mean, if people see themselves as profiting from constantly getting out there and talking about the issues, but ultimately, we do have to look at solutions. And I know there were some articles that came out over the weekend talking about doom porn and perhaps obsessing a little too much about all the things that are wrong without suggesting alternatives to fix it. But certainly here at this radio show, this radio network, we do talk about solutions. The problem is the solutions we know will work are suggestions that are automatically rejected by the money junkies and by the government because they all involve a loss of profits, a loss of control, a loss of power, and they don't want to go that way. They want to keep on doing what they're doing now because it works for them. It gets them more power, more control, more riches. And they are absolutely not going to let go of that without some kind of a major crisis.
Well, and the thing is, I'm not going to mention names, but this broadcast is sort of insulting my intelligence. Like, if I'm not sitting there worried about the world and stolen nukes and all that stuff, and I go take a few hours just to have a little fun, then I'm not serious about taking my country back. Well, yesterday, Mike, I did not listen to the news or anything, and actually I sat there and I bought a nice series of books based on the television series The Waltons. The television show don't really do no justice of actually what the writer was writing. And I learned about what really happened during the Great Depression, how people got through it.
Yep.
On Walton Mountain. And I would suggest anybody to read those books. They are very, very helpful for first-hand accounts of what happened during the Depression years.
Well, very few movies or TV shows ever do justice to the books that they're really based on. And partly that is scale of economy. You can't fit everything into 30, 60, or 90 minutes. The other part of course, is that very often there's political influence to conceal from the movie TV audience what the message really was of the original work. And I can think of no better example of that than The Wizard of Oz, which was presented in this wonderful movie that was very entertaining, but completely obliterated the fact that L. Frank Baum was using Oz as a metaphor for what was going on in the United States at the time. A good example of that, of course, is in the original Oz books. Dorothy's footwear were silver slippers. And it was the idea of silver being a silver-backed currency taking you down the yellow brick road to this assumed paradise in the land of Oz. And it was simply changed to ruby slippers because they look better on the light. But the complete metaphor, the message that L. Frank Baum was trying to say never made it to the movie. Same thing with Gulliver's Travels, which was a metaphor for the political mechanism of its day. And that's part of, convincing Americans that they know what Wizard of Oz and Gulliver's Travel are all about, when they don't actually get the message. And I think it's another reason why, as Phyllis Schlafly keeps pointing out, the Common Core educational reading requirements de-emphasize the classics of American literature and focus on government-issued propaganda handouts, because it's a way of erasing certain concepts from the public consciousness.
I think there's one good step going in my county. There's a petition going around on the primary ballot. There's a petition making it absolutely, law in the county that the school board, that zero tolerance policies are going to be stripped from the schools by the parents, because you can't have wood shop, you can't have metal shop with these zero tolerance policies.
It's gone completely around the bend, and the agenda here is to just get people to be so terrified of doing anything without government permission that they're paralyzed, and it is political repression. We're coming up on a commercial break. George, I got to let you go here. We're going to be back after some commercials with another phone call after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go back to the phones. Chuck in Texas. Aloha, Chuck. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Mike. Well, I wanted to talk to you about the California bill that was passed and the same very similar bill down here in Texas against the NDAA.
Yes.
Both of them are eye candy. They do absolutely nothing. They were put together as a cover for politicians. That's why everybody signed on to it.
Mm-hmm.
And the argument for going with that rather than what the people against the NDAA, PANDA, Unite.org, the resolutions that they write have teeth in them. Those are the ones that passed in Albany and Oxford. But these ones that Texas has adopted and California have adopted, they're absolute eye candy. And the 10th Amendment Center is one at odds with us trying to get the stronger ones passed. Their excuses, well, we can get these passed. But once they get them passed, we cannot hardly get any listen at all to come back with something with more teeth. It does not work that way. They're throwing cover for the politicians. I call out the 10th Amendment Center publicly for betraying the movement, because they're putting out eye candy so they can get more members rather than putting something out that really matters. This is horrible what they have done. They have absolutely cut the legs out from underneath PANDA and all the other organizations that are fighting against the NDAA, because now the politicians can say, well, we already addressed that. All they said was, we'll just sit back. You can take a Californian. You can take a Texan. Down here in Texas, at least we got it to be a misdemeanor if they kidnap and kill a Texan. California's better than that. They're like, well, we won't help you. We'll just sit back and drink our lattes, but you can have a Californian. We just won't help you. How's that? Does that sound like offending anybody?
No, it really doesn't. I can see where from the other side the idea is to score a symbolic victory as opposed to trying to pass a bill with real teeth that might be defeated. And I'm sure probably that from the point of view of the state legislatures and the governors, they're still trying to avoid a direct confrontation with the federal government, especially as the government arms itself. It's a very, very complex issue, but I think certainly in terms of political perception, they're as weak as they are, they're still a slap against the federal government. And right now the federal government is dealing with issues of its own credibility and legitimacy. So I think these bills, even if they are weak, still have some value to them. But I agree, it would be better. It would be better if we did have the states actually standing up and saying, we will resist with force any attempt to grab our state citizens under the NDAA. You come in with a warrant for their arrest for a crime and you take them through due process, or you don't get them at all.
When we accept symbolism over substance, we have lost any semblance of being a free people, because they will use these laws. And allowing them to pass laws like this and organizations like the 10th Amendment Center to use these as a cash cow to get membership while at the same time kneecapping. I'm the Texas leader of PANDA.
Mm-hmm.
And kneecapping us. I just took over and realized what they passed down in Texas 2 months before I took over. I would have never stood there doing a photo op with anybody on that. I thought, hell no, we're not backing this. It's a misdemeanor to kidnap and kill a Texan. I'd take them on.
Yeah, but if they catch you with a marijuana cigarette, it's a felony, I think, down there, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Oh, well.
Absolutely.
Alrighty. Okay, well, Chuck, I understand your ire, and there is merit in what you say, that it is unfortunately form over substance to a very great deal. But it's a hard issue to really figure out there. I think from a politics' perception point of view, it's certainly better than nothing, but I'm in agreement with you that it's time for the states to start to stand up and be willing to back their rights as states, not just in the court system, not just with stringent laws, but be prepared for force, because very clearly the federal government is arming and preparing itself to declare war on the American people and the separate states. Okay, well, we're going to let Chuck in Texas go. Thank you very much for the phone call. Interesting little story that came out of Vigilant Citizen has to do with a lady named Lauren Hill. And apparently, as part of her sentencing for another crime, she was sentenced to 3 months in jail, and she was ordered to attend counseling to deal with her conspiracy theories. And this is very, very Soviet Union tactic, where anybody who questions or doubts the official story about anything is arbitrarily declared to be mentally ill and ordered to undergo treatment by the thought police. And it's a very, very alarming sign that this sort of thing is happening here in the United States of America. Now, getting over to Edward Snowden, he just recently received a well-recognized award for integrity in intelligence, and the American corporate media is just wailing and crying, how could he be getting this? The awards are supposed to go to people who support the official story, not the people who oppose it. And I think probably the reason the corporate media is whining and crying so much is they are now recognizing that they don't have the courage of an Edward Snowden. That they're basically prostitutes and correspondents, and they report what they're told to report, and they get their paychecks and they go home. But in their heart of hearts, they know what they're trying to sell the American people isn't accurate, isn't the truth, isn't factual. And they're seeing somebody stand up with the courage to speak truth to power. And they're resentful because it reminds them that they themselves in the corporate media are a bunch of cowards who are paid propagandists and liars, and they don't like being forced to look into a mirror, which is what Edward Snowden has done. So they're whining and crying about that. Meanwhile, somebody came out with an interesting plug-in for Facebook for those of you who interact with your mail systems over the web interface as opposed to having Outlook on your local machine. And apparently this plug-in will insert random phrases into your emails that will trip off the NSA filters, so that when you send out an email to your local school booster organization, it will have Allah and anthrax and nuclear weapon and a bunch of other stuff in there, so that the PRISM system and XKeyscore will grab the email for surveillance. And that just jams up the entire system. And I'm sure probably there are going to be other people who will come up with similar systems for other web browsers, possibly even for Outlook itself. And if it isn't automated, then just as you're sending out your emails, just make a point, put in some of the buzzwords. We've got the official list at whatreallyhappened.com. We have a randomly selected surveilled keyword at the top of the page every single day, just that you can put in there. There's no reason for us to go along with this unconstitutional surveillance. And anything that we do to jam it up is a legitimate form of protest protected by the First Amendment right to freedom of speech. We have a First Amendment right to freedom of speech to say anthrax or fertilizer or ANFO or whatever we want in our emails. They cannot ban us from using certain words just because it makes their life their task of violating the Constitution that much more difficult. Now, for those of you using D-Link home routers, apparently another easy-to-exploit backdoor has been found in several of their recent models made by D-Link and Planix that allows a hacker to take complete control of your router and your home network. How much do you want to bet this is not an accident, but another NSA backdoor that has been discovered by the bad people? We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to grab a phone call here. Kathy in Massachusetts. Aloha, Kathy. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. I wanted to just say Lauren Hill is African-American, and with all of my struggles trying to afford health care in the old system, I have to say I've never been judged by an African-American. They are wide awake. Like Cindy McKinney said, first it's us and you're next. And what I see happening now is a lot of the, upper middle class whites are starting to feel the pinch of the economy, and they're scared to death, and basically they can't handle the stress. And so they tend to predate upon, the people on food stamps. I'm not justifying what happened in Louisiana, but I'm from Louisiana. You want to talk about a racist area? Oh my God, there's nothing else like it probably in the country. I don't even think Texas holds a candle to it. And I'm not justifying what they did, but when I was in Texas and I had the tooth that was infected, it was hundreds of dollars to go to the dental school to get it taken out, and the residents were on leave for 2 weeks. And I mean, that's how I ended up in the other facility, but it's just a nightmare there. Lack of access to health care. These people know the government is not coming to the rescue. I know that. The people in the trenches.
We saw that in New Orleans following Hurricane Katrina, and I know the racism in Louisiana. It's a holdover from pre-Civil War days, and I remember many years ago when I was still working as a professional magician, I did a summer on a riverboat, the Mississippi Queen, and I remember one time we were docked at Natchez under the hill, and I was walking up to Natchez on the hill just to go looking through antique stores and stuff. And halfway up the road, I encountered this elderly black lady pulling this cart, and just my normal instinct, I said, let me help you with that, and grabbed one of the handles. And as we came up over the rise to Natchez, I got stares not just from the white people, but from the black people. Like, there's something wrong with this picture, and it's just, that's stuck with me all these years.
Yeah, and that's why, like yesterday I listened for about 5 minutes to a show on another network, and of all things, he's son of an oral surgeon in Texas, okay? Guess who that might be? And I hate to say it, I give the benefit of the doubt that I heard them going off about that food stamp, EBT, going, you're poor because you're stupid and you're lazy. And I tell you what, I called the head network, and I called the Austin channel, and I said, this guy has got to shut his judgmental mouth. We have, when I was in Seattle, I went to Oregon after my mom was in Oregon. That's how I ended up out there, and I got trapped out there. It was a miracle I could even get relocated to Boston. A medical anthropologist opened her home to me, knowing I couldn't. I was literally like, it's lucky I'm alive from the suffering I've endured. But I would stand over that, sleeping on the frickin' street in rainy Seattle, me and another guy holding an umbrella, and we're like, you have to move. I had a roof over my head. You have to move. And he said, where am I going to go? The shelters were full. And I said, I don't know. But you can't stay here, because if you go backwards, you're going to fall down that, the drop-off, the pit into the parking thing the way it was built. I said, you could die. And he was a vet, and I saw many in Seattle. There's so many homeless there. They're sleeping in their cars with their freaking legs blown off, and people like us are listening to these shows, and we have all got to behave and start taking the high road. And if you're a Christian, then you need to act like one, not be judgmental like that. You didn't do that today, and I want to commend you, and I hope others get the drift of that, because you took the high road and you didn't predate upon the vulnerable in the EBT cards going down, and I want to thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome for that. And, basically what it is when you have the money junkies with their various scams going on, they don't want to admit to themselves what they're doing is destructive to the local community. Just like anybody who's addicted to heroin or cocaine or any other drug, they just go out of their way to deny that their behavior is causing harm to their loved ones around them or their local community. It's always the other guy's fault. I remember when I was still married to my first wife, Broadzilla, and she was engaging in some things that I thought were very harmful, and her attitude was, well, it's their fault because they let me get away with it. And we're seeing this, with our moneyed class now, where they're enjoying, immense wealth from their various scams and Ponzi schemes and rigging, and they don't want to admit to themselves what they're doing was morally questionable. So it's their fault because they're stupid. It's their fault because they bought houses they really shouldn't have been able to afford, forgetting how they were being lured in with teaser rates, that first-time home buying credit. The corporate media just saying, yes, go out and buy houses. Now's the time to buy houses. These people who are out there on food stamps did not ask to be there. I've talked with a lot of these people. They went to college. They lived their lives. They played by the rules. They did what society told them they should do to have decent lives, and it was all taken away from them. They did nothing wrong. It was done to them. They are the victims of this predatory economic system that has risen inside the United States of America. And again, this style of banking was the very style of banking we fought a revolution to be free of. And you look at any country in history that is enslaved to a private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan and interest, and you will find an extremely wealthy banker class sitting over an absolutely impoverished and hopeless and homeless population. And that is absolutely the inevitable result of this system of banking, and we need to get rid of it. Hopefully, in the coming crash, because all these private central banks are linked together, they'll all be brought down at the same time, and we, the people of planet Earth, have to stand up and say, no more of this. It is a failed system. Rule by bankers' compound interest is no more legitimate a form of governance than rule by divine right or rule by slavery. The only legitimate form of governance is self-governance, and that certainly means governance over the type of economy the nation will have, the public currency as a public utility. Anything else, Kathy?
One last thing, just to quell this racism, and one of the guys also, actually two really quick things. One guy actually who's going to be coming on your network, I heard him say on another show, on another network, say, they're not real Americans like us. Yeah, I'm a real American. And my father was a flight instructor in World War II. I'm a real American, buddy, and you wouldn't last 10 minutes with me. I could chew you up one side and down the other. My tongue would be my sword. I don't need a freaking weapon. My tongue will bring you down because you wouldn't have survived what I have survived and what some of the people in the trenches have survived in this country. And I'm as American as anybody. And I just want to quell that. And just to finish with this African-American lady in Seattle, she had a full-body leg cast on, and she was at a bus stop. And I still had my old Volvo. And I was on, right downtown in Seattle. And I was at this red light, and it was starting to rain, and it looked like it was going to rain a lot. And I said, do you need a ride? And she said, girl, do I need a ride? she climbed in my Volvo, and I took her to the pharmacy. And then it was just this, amazing evening, and I've never seen her again. And I tell you what, that African-American lady, she saved my diabetic rear end for the next 2 years. She told me how to survive and how to cope, because as a former uppity white chick, I would have been freaking dead, except if I hadn't been nice and been willing to give the lady with a ride in her car.
I need to cut you off here because we're almost at the commercial break here, but I want to make a point that I keep making over and over again. Newborn babies don't know they're supposed to be hating certain other people. If you take a bunch of white babies and yellow babies and red babies and black babies, they'll play with each other. Okay, they don't know they're supposed to hate the other person. Newborn babies don't know they're supposed to be shocked by certain words or certain ideas or certain lifestyles. All of that is taught to you in order to control you, to make you useful to certain political agendas. I love that song that Rodgers and Hammerstein put in South Pacific, You've Got to Be Carefully Taught. You've got to be taught all the same people your relatives hate. I forget the lyrics, but it was that whole point. And it's all learned. People can get together, Christians, Jews, Muslims, gays, straights, whatever. All of these divisions are artificially created by political opportunists to say, we've got to band together because they're coming to get you, and if you support me and give me your money and fight my wars, I'll protect you from those evil people over there. And you're absolutely right. That idea about they're not real Americans is almost laughable. The only real Americans are the Clovis people. And everybody else since then is an immigrant. Now, that doesn't mean I think we should open the borders to anybody who wants to come in here, but there is a legal process for immigration, and if you come through it, welcome to our country. Have fun. Go to Disneyland. But this idea of simply opening the borders and letting anybody at all come in when they want, that's obviously for a political agenda, but it is not what is in the best long-term economic interest of this country. Kathy, got to let you go here. We're coming up on a commercial break, and I got to wrap a few things up here. We're getting word now that there may, in fact, be a deal inside the Congress and the White House to temporarily raise the debt ceiling out to next February, so they've got more time to politic about spending cuts and so forth. And we all know what's going to happen because it happened last January. They will temporarily raise the debt ceiling, and when it gets to the deadline, they say, well, there's no way we can lower the debt ceiling. We've borrowed up to that max again. They've maxed out another credit card. So it's a way of raising the debt ceiling without the American people getting upset about the increase in debt. Because we all know that Barack Obama is smoking opium when he says raising the debt ceiling does not automatically raise the indebtedness of this country. That's complete and utter nonsense. Certainly history has put the lie to that latest prevarication from Obama. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And the corporate media is now really pushing this new deal that they've got to temporarily raise the U.S. debt ceiling through to February 15th. And, of course, we know what's going to happen come February 15th. They won't be able to lower the debt ceiling back down again, and it'll be made permanent then, when hopefully the American people are distracted looking at something else, like war with Iran or whatnot. Now, interestingly enough, last Thursday when Treasury Secretary Jacob Lew was testifying before the Senate Finance Committee in support of raising the debt ceiling, and he was quizzed about just how Treasury handles the new debt, and he went through this long, involved situation of raising the debt and bringing in new tax revenues and everything. And over at cnsnews.com, they pointed out that his description of how Treasury handles the debt is almost word for word the Security and Exchange Commission's definition of a Ponzi scheme, which is not a surprise to those of you listening to this show because you've all known that for years. But basically, Treasury Secretary Lew was saying to the Senate, they're running the U.S. government's debt as a Ponzi scheme. And we know that all Ponzi schemes collapse when they cannot find new investors, new lenders, or new revenue, meaning more taxes. It's going to come crashing down. It's only a matter of time. No nation with a private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest has endured. Fiat currencies, in fact, there's a wonderful story we just put up at whatreallyhappened.com about 9 secrets about money that will probably shock you. And in there is the fact that these fiat-issued debt currencies do have a finite lifespan. They don't last very long. We're pushing the envelope as it is. Now, I want to get back to an interesting story. This came out over the weekend where Joe Salente had his normal end-of-the-week wrap-up, and buried in this video at 6 minutes and 33 seconds, Gerald is reporting the state of Connecticut, and in particular Assistant Attorney General Patrick B. Quanashi, refuses to release the specific antidepressants Adam Lanza was on when he carried out the shooting at Newtown. And he includes the actual video in which Patrick B. Quanashi states that even if in this one case Lanza's actions were caused by his medication, this is not useful information for the public to have because it might convince people to stop taking their prescription medication, and that would be a disaster, especially for the pharmaceutical companies. And of course, Assistant District Attorney Patrick B. Quanashi is flat out wrong. This is not just one case. There are thousands upon thousands of well-documented cases linking prescription antidepressants to acts of extreme violence and suicide. So, either Patrick B. Quanashi is a moron who has not done due diligence before making his decision, or he owns a lot of stock in Big Pharma, or he's received some generous campaign contributions from the big pharmaceutical companies. In any case, the voters of Connecticut need to be very wary of this man because they had the video where he's out there saying, well, even if it's true in this one case, the people don't need to know this, but we'll blame the guns. We'll blame the guns because guns are bad and prescription medications are good, and so forth and so on. Let's see, 60% of Americans want a third-party candidate for 2016. I'm not surprised about that at all. Of course, we know the system is rigged against the third party. We saw that with, well, even within the party. The candidates the people want will not get anywhere. We saw that with Ron Paul in 2008 and 2012. And apparently in Ohio, they have just passed a law literally outlawing any third parties. Ohio is now specifically a hunting preserve reserved to the Republicans and the Democrats. And the excuse given was that, oh, these third parties steal votes from the Republicans and Democrats and skew the elections unfairly. Now, you show me where in the Constitution of the United States of America it says we are supposed to only have two parties. You will not find it in there. When the United States was started, parties came and went. Each new agenda, each new politician would have their party and attract supporters and build a coalition and a consensus to win elections. The reason we have a two-party system in this country is all about money. Because before the rise of the two-party system, when you had 5, 10, 15 parties, those who wanted to buy the election system and bypass the voters would have to contribute campaign donations to all 10 or 15 parties in order to own whichever candidate won. So with a two-party system, that saves these money junkies costs. They only have to donate to two candidates in order to bypass the will of the people. And that's the reason we have a two-party system. And it is not legal, it is not constitutional, and the traditional parties in Ohio have absolutely no legal foundation for banning third parties. It's kind of what we're seeing Greece do right now with Golden Dawn. We don't like you. You're not part of the entrenched system. Therefore, you are banned and declared illegal. According to a recent poll in NBC and the Wall Street Journal, 60% of Americans say fire every member of Congress. We ran our own poll at whatreallyhappened.com. We came out with 96% said fire every member of Congress. I know there's a lot of people screaming, impeach Obama, impeach Obama. It's time to impeach the entire government because it is a systemic problem. If we get rid of Obama, Biden moves in. He's just as pro-Israel, pro-business, and he's already starting to run for 2016. It's no one individual. It's no one individual party. It is a systemic problem. The entire system is corrupted beyond redemption. We need to acknowledge that. Absolutely need to acknowledge that. All righty. Let's see. Apparently, the regulatory framework that guides the approval process for new pharmaceutical drugs is becoming more and more compromised as drug companies continue to chip away at core functions. Safety testing. According to a new report by Reuters, new cancer drugs are among the worst offenders these days, with many of them now successfully completely bypassing the normal clinical trial process to get them on the market as quickly as possible. This from the same industry that's absolutely adamant that you not be allowed to go down to your local health food store and buy herbs and other supplements off the shelf, with hundreds of years proven history of benefit to the patients. It's all being driven by the money. By the way, over this last weekend, we also had another protest on top of the truckers and the veterans, was a worldwide protest against Monsanto and the dangers of genetically modified crops. And apparently another victory has been scored down in Mexico, where the courts now have ruled that Monsanto and Pioneer must stop selling genetically modified seeds in Mexico. So more and more countries are acknowledging this technology is very dangerous. It's been handled in a very reckless and cavalier fashion. There are proven problems with this technology. And all of Monsanto's money and all of Monsanto's lobbyists are not able to prevail in many countries. Except here in the United States of America, where they still insist you will eat your GMO food. You're not allowed to know that it's in there. Because if Monsanto can't sell this stuff to the rest of the world, then by golly, they'll be allowed to sell it here in the United States of America. Meanwhile, up in Canada, the anti-fracking movement has sparked a new controversy as the Elsipogtog First Nation, Native Americans, Native Canadians, have announced a major land reclamation because the land is being poisoned by fracking, and they're saying, well, this is actually our land we're letting you use, but if you're going to poison it, we're just going to take it back. So now that has kicked this thing upward to where New Brunswick Premier David Alward is now having to go back to the negotiating table over this whole fracking industry. He's being given an ultimatum. Stop the fracking or we're just going to take our land back. So, anyway, let's see, I'm almost to the end of the show. I want to finish again by asking this question that you should be asking. As the government continues to talk about raising the debt ceiling, it's time to ask, why, when the Constitution gives the government the authority to create and issue an interest-free public currency, does the government continue to borrow the public currency at interest from a privately owned central bank? That's the question you should all be asking. And the federal government doesn't want you to be asking it because they don't have an answer, other than they got bought 100 years ago to sell you into the slavery of the bankers. But get that question out there, share it with everybody. There's the music. It's time for us to get out of here and accomplish something useful with the rest of Columbus Day. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay skeptical, stay angry, keep informed, make good choices. Head on over to the Republic Trading Group to buy your silver and gold. Head on over to Republic Broadcasting. Hit that donate button. We rely on your support because we don't get money from those big corporations that we tell the truth on. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.